Before tonight's second presidential debate, there were rumors that Mike Pence would be leaving the ticket. Sorry, Mike. Looks like you're going to have to carry this one to full term. Trump versus Hillary starts now!
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Welcome to Trump versus Hillary. I am your moderator, Christian Bladt, on Twitter @ChristianDMZ. And please, Trump versus Hillary, you got to follow it on Twitter @TrumpHillary16. We're 2 men down, but we have 3/5 of a panel tonight, which I think is going to be more than enough. Maybe we'll actually be able to get some issues, but I'll just go ahead and mention Clinton Cash now at the top of the show. We'll get it out of the way. Clinton Cash, Clinton Cash, Clinton Cash. But to my left, for those of you watching on YouTube, Drexel Heard @Drexel Heard. And on the other end of the desk, Chelsea Galicia @Chelsea Galicia. Welcome to Trump versus Hillary. Stephen Helmkamp on assignment. Scott Moore moving, but also on assignment. And I realize Stephen's not going to be here for the next debate either.
Well, I think you just pretty much summed up what he would normally say in the show anyway.
It would be a lot about Clinton Cash. But is there a chance that he's just like, man, even though I wasn't for this guy, I wasn't for this Trump character, I just don't want any part of this anymore?
I would hope so.
I would hope so.
I can't wait to ask.
But really, have you had indication that he's washing his hands entirely? Because she's Cricket Hillary, Clinton Cash, there's a lot of issues. And look, I mean, what it comes down to, you're sort of making light of the fact that Stephen's not here, but ultimately there are people who are just not Hillary people, and voting for Trump, regardless of what that entails, they're just not Hillary. They're the never Hillary crowd. They want to vote for somebody that will make sure she's not president. I don't know if Stephen's there, but do you feel like the events of the last few days would have changed any of those minds? Well, the never Hillary people, are they suddenly like, well, okay, never Hillary, except that this might actually be the one situation where we have Hillary?
Well, I just want to address a couple of things, because last week it got really personal, because I get really emotional when it comes down to this election, because the election is really personal for a lot of people, and sometimes I can get a little pointed in what I say, and obviously being pointed at Stephen last week was not.
That was only really the second time in all the shows we've done. There have been two personal burns.
And I don't normally get that personal, but I will say this about something. I had the opportunity to be at the United Methodist Church this morning and listening to Kamala Harris and Cory Booker speak. And one of the things that we're constantly reminded in this election, and that I constantly press Stephen on during our shows, is that folks like Stephen and folks like the Trump voters who are never Hillary never quite rally around policy that they believe in. And it goes back to the saying that they always say, which is, or that folks say is, which is, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And in this case, folks like Stephen and folks like never Hillary supporters are falling for the trap that Republicans have set up for people time and time after again, where they don't talk about actual policy, because as we know, a majority of voters who support Republican policies are low-income voters who Republicans aren't helping in the first place. So I think that is where the voters like that have to come to the realization that at the end of the day, they either have, they can rally around social issues all they want to, but at the end of the day, it's not what puts food on their table.
Right, and look, there are a lot of issues that we can talk about, but before we even get to the debate, I think we'd be crazy if we didn't talk about the Trump video. And as the female on the panel, obviously you did not have a particularly high opinion of Donald Trump. But after you hear that video, even if you didn't hear it and you just read about it, whatever the case, once you hear that video has been released, what does it make you think about people who are still on the Trump bandwagon, people that are still voting for Trump, and also for the people that this was the final straw? We heard a number of people, John McCain will no longer endorse him. How was it this?
I don't want anything to do with anyone that supports Trump.
And you felt that way beforehand, and then this is just...
Well, I'm like, well, we can get all along civilly, we can be respectful.
Right.
And
on November 10th, we'll all be friends.
I still would respect them as a human being and not go out of my way to injure them or, demean them. But I want nothing to do with anybody who can stand by that.
Yeah. Okay. I think that that's fair. I mean, it's, it's such a divisive thing, and it's so strange that it's part of a political, an election season.
I mean, remember last week, was it a whole week ago? Last week when we were talking about all the reasons that I personally fear Trump because he's insulted me as a part of group. The Mexican woman, and we were talking about, well, maybe he wouldn't call you Miss Piggy because you're thin. I'm like, oh goodness, thank goodness
Lucky
I'm
you,
safe.
by the way, yeah.
Dear God, what if he found me attractive? Then I would be...
That would be worse.
Fear again. So there's just no way that I feel safe at all with Trump around or any Trump supporter who can just be like, yeah, but... still, I'm going to stand by him.
And what we're sort of seeing a lot of from the Trump camp, not even the Trump camp, sorry, but the Trump supporters and the Never Hillary people are, yes, Donald Trump said this, yes, it's terrible, and then it immediately, without taking a breath, but Bill Clinton, bad record with women, they will allege that he raped several women and that Hillary then went after him, which is the way that makes it a connection because you involve Hillary. You don't just say Bill did all these things. Well, Hillary intimidated him. And in fact, we had a press conference before the debate today where several of those women were brought out. They sat there with Donald Trump. I guess they were also at the debate. Do you feel like, Drexel, this is desperate, grasping at straws by the Trump campaign? I mean, you may have felt like there were things there, but this sort of seems like one of those, like, well, what the hell else do we have? Let's go after it. Let's go all in.
Well, I think a lot of the things that Donald Trump's campaign has done over the past couple of months has been pretty desperate. I think that we saw in that press conference today a couple things. Steve Bannon was in the room, and I believe Steve Bannon pretty much orchestrated what we saw on the stage.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a photo of Steve Bannon standing off on the side, and he has, like the Jack Nicholson Joker smile painted on his face because he's like, this is all my work. It's all come to fruition. Finally, we're going to talk about all these things about Bill Clinton.
The other part of the press conference that happened today was the fact that those women that were up there, were all alleged accusers of Bill Clinton, or allegedly accused him of something.
Right.
But
they are accusers. What they accused him is alleged. Yes.
It's unproven. All that stuff. But they did not use that press conference to talk about why they were there. Right. They spent the time going down the line talking about how they were Trump supporters, how they supported Trump. It was never about the reason why Trump brought them there. They were used as a pawn, once again, to somehow rattle, or what they thought was going to rattle Secretary Clinton, and putting them in the front row. So they weren't there for any other reason other than pure desperation. I think that when you have this tape coming out, when you go a week about taxes, and then you got a week about Elisa Machado, and anything, there was an article today where producers of The Apprentice, I think it's going to come out a video where they talk about Trump using the N-word. So I think that
they said that there's much worse than this video.
So I think they're trying to fight back in any way they know how. When you're in the dirt, you get a little bit scrappy, and I think this is their version of scrappy. And I hate to bring up Cory Booker again, but he tweeted out something very funny today and called them positively outlandish souls. So if you just take that acronym and think about it, that's what a lot of those Hillary supporters, the never Hillary supporters, or the some of them are irredeemable members of the Trump camp are, and I believe that they are positively outlandish souls.
I was kind of disappointed that neither one of them brought up the fact that this kind of locker room talk is what's rape culture, and that it's promoting it, it's what's made it acceptable. For those of us that were shocked by the Brock Turner conviction of we weren't shocked by the conviction because he raped an unconscious woman, but the fact that he was sentenced to 6 months and then only served 3. And then some of us are so shocked by that, and we're like, oh, but now the man that half of America, maybe, respects enough to put as a president is advocating those similar behaviors.
No. I mean, it's obviously what we're seeing, and obviously it's a serious situation. I did see something funny online that for Trump to talk about anything as locker room talk when it's very clear he hasn't been in the gym in a very long time is fairly outlandish. Well, you know, that's a lot of stuff that happened outside of the debate.
Positively outlandish.
Positively outlandish. There are a lot of things about the debate to talk about. I'm going to start off with an early point. My wife texted me during that there should have been a drinking game, that every time he says disaster, you take a drink. We would not be able to sit upright right now if we had done that. So it's great in theory, but you know, for people at home, that probably would have made it more bearable. There were some other things that I noticed. Trump was very subdued. I was wondering if he possibly was on Quaaludes or one of those trank darts that they use when they want to photograph a lion, you know, and they don't, you know, they want it to be just a little. He was very, very dialed down, which I remember when we talked about the first presidential debate. I think that, you know, he got ramped up and agitated. He kind of stayed the same level, which I think he had to at this point.
Well, I think he walked in. To me, he appeared like a dog walking in with his tail between his legs.
Okay.
And he kind of kept that about him for a little while until he started arguing with the moderators about, hey, you're giving her more time than me and you're not interrupting her as much as you interrupt me.
Yeah, I mean, there was some of that.
And I also think that when you're walking around a stage, which he did, which he never stopped walking. Like his pattern, his walk pattern.
He
was
did
just all
lumber
over the place.
around the stage. Yeah.
He never sat down. He always stood behind the chair. Maybe he was trying to intimidate Secretary Clinton because
maybe
that's
he was trying to show his stamina. He can stand for 90 minutes.
And I don't think that put him. I think that it didn't show he was very comfortable up there, and you saw that just in all of his answers in terms of policy because he couldn't. He brought up. I mean, he just said basically. You said basically what he talked about the whole time.
No. I mean, he has. And there were. And Hillary did this to an extent too. There were a lot of things that if you watch the first debate, as it went on, you're like, okay, we've heard all this before, all these very rehearsed, pat answers, and you felt like, Trump had a few more of them.
But I just want to bring up, because I think
yeah.
that I always have a problem with people talking about rehearsed answers. I think if you know your policy well enough, you are going to be rehearsed. If you know the nuts and bolts of what you want to do, that's not rehearsed. That's just prepared. That's just, exactly what your policy is. And Donald Trump not being able to say, people can write it off and say, oh, well, he's just thinking off the cuff. Well, no. The fact that he hasn't talked about Syria with his vice presidential nominee, and the fact that his vice presidential nominee last week could not talk about his Syrian policy means that he doesn't actually have or know policy. And the fact that he brought up Mosul, which is not even in Iran, which is not even in Syria, that's what we're getting at, is the fact that he just does not have a policy.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Mike Pence because obviously there, as I mentioned at the top of the show, there were sort of a rumbling that he might leave the ticket, which, as you have read more in the hours since, that doesn't seem to be the case. But he didn't tweet once during the debate. I don't know if he's tweeted after because we've been in here getting ready. But he didn't tweet once during the debate. Tim Kaine was, a little lapdog puppy, just like, yes, everything you say is great, Hillary. But Mike Pence was like, no, I'm out.
Well, that's the difference between a vice presidential candidate who supports their nominee, who supports their partner, and one who doesn't.
Well, I think that we're seeing a lot more where I think for Pence that this opportunity, if he were to leave the ticket, it would be because he's gotten everything he can out of it at this point, which is, having the opportunity to maybe be the front runner for 2020.
Make him an opportunist.
Right. And one thing I saw on Twitter in terms of policy was people were upset that Hillary was being asked so much about Bill's opinions and things that Bill Clinton did. And an interesting point, and I'm sorry I didn't write down who said it. I did for a few things, but this was one that I didn't. Said that it would be like asking Melania about health care. It's like, well, just if you're going to do that to Hillary, why don't you do that for her? And then one other thing from Twitter, Greg Gutfeld from Fox News said that Trump is like a guy who calls in to talk radio, which I thought was very funny because he's got a very well rehearsed. He's got all this anger that come ebbs and flows as the course of the debate goes along. Anyway, I think overall that this was another thing I saw on Twitter in terms of summarizing the debate. Republican pollster Neil Newhouse, he said Trump was playing to his base, reinforcing every voter who was already for him. 40% of the vote isn't going to be enough to win, and that's basically much more eloquently than I was able to. That was kind of what I was thinking. I'm like, oh, he's saying everything that his people want to hear. The people that are going to vote for him, no matter, it doesn't matter what the next tape is, what video, it doesn't matter what he says at a rally. These are the people who are going to vote for him. It probably is around 40%. Right. There are other people who will probably end up deciding to vote for him too, for whatever reason. But there are the diehard, either pro-Trump or anti-Hillary people. And I'll start with you, Chelsea. Do you feel like that's basically what Trump did? Is he just reinforced his standing with the people whose minds were already made up?
Yeah, he didn't say really anything new that would attract any undecided voter. I can't imagine anything new that somebody thought, oh, hey, now there's something I haven't heard of that sounds like a good idea that I'm going to place my vote on him. So I think that's all that we can say.
Right, and you being someone who was not inclined to be won over by Donald Trump, I think even objectively you could look and see, I don't see how anyone else would really be won over by any of these things.
I mean, to be fair, there were a couple of fair points that he had.
Is it because he mentioned Bernie Sanders 3 times?
No, and the way that
that could have been another drinking game.
Bernie Sanders says that she has terrible judgment 3 times. I was hoping for 4, but we had a hat trick of Bernie mentions, yes.
Yeah, but the problem is that somebody like me, a Bernie supporter who really follows Bernie, understands that Bernie supports Hillary as much as it was a contentious primary, and there are a lot of huge differences in principles and opinions. Thank you. Mm-hmm. That if that's what he said, and there's just no option. I couldn't with a clean conscience vote for Trump, and then Jill Stein or Gary Johnson. First, I have issues with both of them, and that's just not really going to happen. Either one of those is not going to happen.
Right.
So, really, Hillary is the only choice that I really have, if we can call it a choice. But to be fair to Trump, he did make a fair point about we have a habit of arming rebels who turn out to be worse than the governments that we are trying to defeat. That does turn out to be true a lot of the times, and I think that should be something that we really take a look at and consider before we choose to arm people.
I believe that we certainly trained and armed Osama bin Laden at one point. I mean, that's obviously the biggest example that we have. But yeah. It would be nice. I mean, I don't know if it was accurate, but it was part of when he was saying to Hillary, you don't know which ones the rebels are in Syria.
Yeah, you don't know who they are.
Yeah, and while that might not be the point, but to what you're saying is like, yeah, let's just be careful who we side with in these conflicts.
Which is very funny, because I think in that same breath he defended the actions of Russia, Iran, and Syria, and their actions on what he perceives as their strategy towards ISIS, not realizing that America is leading that fight because there is a coalition, and it is the American coalition that is directing all of these other nations to make that happen. So I think that, to the point of Donald Trump in terms of the debate, I thought he got a lot of good jabs in for his base. I thought that...
I'm just getting so tired of them. They just seem so childish by now.
Right, but here's the thing. I think that those jabs won't move anybody, because I think that they weren't effective. His initial jab about the women... the press conference and then bringing them in the hall and then bringing them up in the debate didn't have much of an effect because it was over in an instant. Yeah. Then there was then he said to Anderson, why aren't you bringing up the emails? The question was about the emails, and then they talked about it, and then he brought up WikiLeaks right after. That, and then that went nowhere.
I think that there were a lot of opportunities to legitimately be critical of both of the moderators, but he did say that basically right after Martha Raddatz had brought up the emails. Right. So I was like, I don't think you're listening, because save that bullet for when they legitimately got into a point, Martha more so than Anderson. By the way, I think they both did a terrible job. But I think that Martha Raddatz basically got into a debate with Donald Trump.
I mean, she did. And I think, I said this before, I think Martha Raddatz was kind of over it.
Yeah, which her job is not to be over it.
Right, she pulled a Candy Crowley, and I think people will talk about that a little bit. I mean, post-debate analysis, they'll talk about the fact that, I think that Martha Raddatz is such a... she's such a good journalist that she wants to keep the facts up front and center. Like, in the last debate, Lester Holt said, "Oh, well, you actually did say that about Iraq,"
Right.
and then Martha Raddatz just took it too much of a step
I think
further
that the
in
tone was a
bringing
lot
that up.
different, and people were critical of Lester Holt after that debate.
Right.
Not here on this panel. I think we all felt like he did a fair job. And by way of comparison, I think we see now, like, oh yeah, he did a great job because. And I understand that they're trying to, get points in there and back and forth, but it should essentially be up to the other candidate to disprove things. And it was not the extent of Candy Crowley, but it felt a little bit like that. Yeah.
But it was also a little unfair that the fact that they spent 4 minutes. They essentially spent 4 minutes giving Donald Trump airtime to talk about nothing. It just kind of went on and on and on. And Martha Raddatz was had a hand in that. And where they could have had 2 more questions at the end of the debate, they only got 1 more question in, and that had a lot to do with that 4. And if you, we're here in the studio, and, we only do a 45-minute to an hour show, which can go by like that, but it's also a lot of airtime to fill up.
Yeah.
And 4 minutes on that stage is a lot of
on that stage, 4 minutes
airtime.
Yeah.
And, he complained a lot about how Hillary Clinton got 30 seconds more, a minute more, when he got 4 minutes of uninterrupted. Hillary Clinton didn't say a single word during that 4 minutes, or say, "Hey, his time is clearly blinking and the red light's on."
He was doing a lot.
Yeah, there was some pointing, which I was wondering what that was. Was that like, are we having dinner afterwards or whatever? I wasn't quite sure. But I think that, to their credit, I would say that both Anderson Cooper and Martha Raddatz did their part to at least give the appearance of impartiality. They tried to be tough on Hillary. They were much tougher on Donald Trump. I feel some years, some election cycles, you can feel like, oh, they're doing a good job of keeping their beliefs out of it. I think with Donald Trump, it is very hard, and I would assume Martha Raddatz, as a woman, is taking it very personally.
Right.
And it was, and again, I don't think that they did a good job because of it. I'll be very interested to see what Chris Wallace does when they announce who the moderators were. He was the one that I feel like will be the toughest on both of them, and it will be the most fair. That doesn't mean that Donald Trump will complain the most, but I do feel like that one will be interesting. But I wanted to kind of circle back to, for you, Drexel, was, do you feel like there could be undecided voters that were convinced that Donald Trump, they're just like, you know what, tape from 11 years ago is not as important as these other issues. He talked about, even Chelsea found something that she thought, like, well, he did have a good point about this. Do you think it's possible that from just tonight's debate alone that someone could come away with, I'm going to at least think a lot harder and consider Donald Trump now, whereas I didn't think I would?
Probably not. I just don't think that. It goes back to what I said earlier, is that, there's nothing that Donald Trump actually stands for in terms of policy. And unfortunately for Mike Pence, who has been a legislator, has been a governor, that doesn't really bode well for people like that, and or voters in general. So I think that undecided voters will take away the fact that Donald Trump has no policy that he actually addressed. I mean, we talked about taxes, which he did fine. I mean, I think taxes and the economy are something that
But he said
Republicans,
that she was going to raise taxes
right,
on
which
them. That's not
I'm
true.
in terms of policy, like in terms of like trickle down, like the core Republican stance on the
Like
taxes.
actually talking about
like he
what he
knows
would
what
do.
what the Republican stance on taxes are. Okay, great, he can talk about that. Obviously, he doesn't really have a policy in Syria. He doesn't have he talked about Justice Scalia being his standard for
Dear God,
Supreme Court,
please,
but he didn't
no.
talk. But he didn't talk about reasons why he would support somebody like Justice Scalia, where Hillary Clinton rattled off Citizens United, voting rights, Roe v. Wade, marriage equality, and not siding with corporate interests as her litmus test for the type of Supreme Court justice. So, and then when he had the question about healthcare coverage, like, from the beginning, and I put this on Facebook, which was the fact that Donald Trump agreed with Hillary Clinton from the beginning of the debate, and then praised her her handling of the way that she fights for the American people towards the end. So it kind of bookended itself with Donald Trump.
There was a lot of disagreement in between.
A lot of disagreement in between, but at the end of the day, he agreed with her 3 or 4 times in the last debate. Mike Pence agreed with the policies of the Clinton-Kaine ticket in the VP debate, and Donald Trump seems to be agreeing quite a bit with the policy of the Clinton-Kaine that Democrats are putting forth in this debate.
One more point about undecided voters. My friend Mindy brought this up on Facebook, and it was a question that we got from a woman, a Muslim woman, and she asked the question, if you're a Muslim woman, or I guess a Muslim, how are you still undecided, considering what Donald Trump has said about you? So I'll start with Chelsea. Do you think that says more about Hillary Clinton, that a Muslim woman is still not 100% on board with Hillary Clinton and might consider someone who, hasn't been kind to her people? Let's just be very euphemistic about it.
I don't know. That's kind of fair, and it's kind of a tough question. I mean, I understand that there are a lot of reasons not to like Hillary. I was very Bernie,
Sure.
and verging on Bernie or bust. So I kind of get that. You giggle.
I love the turnaround. That's what I'm saying. I'm laughing at the turn, where you are now versus
He
where we
appreciates
started.
your personal growth. Is that what you're going to try to say?
No, I'm saying that she started saying where she is now and where she was, and I love it. I think it's great.
I don't know how somebody goes this long
We're pretty far in at this point, but
making a decision.
I've thought that a lot of years. I think usually the choice is very clear. It's been a long time where there's one where you're like, there were definitely arguments for certain campaigns. I think that people, at that point in 2000, I think they were like, well, there's not that much different between Al Gore and George W. Bush, which in hindsight, people probably find preposterous, but that's the last time I kind of remember, because it's been pretty stark differences ever since. So it's a little surprising, because I feel like, it's not one or two things that you're like, oh, they won me over on this. Oh, but I really like her on that. They're very different approaches to being president.
But I also don't...
Very different views of the entire world.
Right. I mean, at the beginning, Hillary even made the point is that she thinks America's already great because we're good people, and Trump's whole point, he has the red hats that say it, is to make America great again. Your point, Tracy.
I also don't think that I don't think that a majority of that room was undecided in general. I think that everybody kind of had an idea where they leaned.
Yeah.
I think that Muslim woman probably wasn't as undecided because there's got to be some sort of diversity in that room.
Yeah.
And I think that the questions that were posed, that question that she said was very pointed at Donald Trump. The question that Mr. Clark, the African American guy in the audience, said was very pointed question. So I don't think that they were undecided. I think that they wanted to get into that room to ask a very specific question because they didn't feel like that question would be asked by the moderators.
Right, and speaking about the audience, there's someone in particular that I would like to highlight as we have a photo for them. I don't know, this guy did not ask a question, but his face kind of says it all. And to me, this face says, I'm not buying bullshit from either one of these people. I can't believe anything I'm hearing tonight. How do I have to vote for these two losers? Seth Meyers is apparently sitting behind him.
I would like to, for two things. I would like to point out that Paul Ryan was also in that debate, in that hall of undecided voters, so he might be voting for Hillary Clinton.
By the way, he's definitely voting for Hillary Clinton.
Voted for Hillary Clinton.
Unless he's like going Gary Johnson.
Right. I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump might vote for Hillary
Clinton. But this
Clinton.
guy, to me, is the American people.
But
because
this guy's face actually came up on the screen when Donald Trump talked about the African Americans.
Yes,
that photo that you're saying.
That was not the only time I saw him, but you're right. That's when this one is from.
I think that face was a majority of the time when Donald Trump was talking, and probably less time when Hillary Clinton was talking.
Right, but I think to my point, I think a lot of people do feel that way. They're like they're voting for Hillary because they're going to hold their nose because it's like there's so much wrong with her, but it just doesn't even compare. And you feel like that guy is like, all right, I'm going to vote for Hillary, I guess.
But here's the thing. I think that the reason, and people talk to me all the time about the rise of Donald Trump. The rise of Donald Trump is not about Hillary Clinton's policies. The Republicans never attack Hillary Clinton on policy. They always attack her on something that they've dreamed up.
I think that there are cases about they talk about Obamacare.
They talk about Obamacare in the sense that this was the Obama policy, not the Hillary Clinton policy.
And that she's going to continue it though.
Right,
yeah.
But they're not attacking Hillary Clinton for her actual policies. Right. They're attacking Hillary Clinton for whatever Breitbart has brought up today or whatever WikiLeaks has dropped out today. Whereas Chelsea can sit up here and talk about actual policy that she doesn't believe in or that she doesn't agree with Hillary Clinton. You've never seen Donald Trump. You've never seen any Republican get out there and talk about and voters talk about why they don't agree with Hillary Clinton. They just talk about what they've regurgitated from some
things like she's going to take your guns away.
Right, and to the fact that she felt that she had to bring up Second Amendment, I didn't even think Donald Trump brought up Second Amendment in that question at all. Where she felt that, hey,
Well, he
listen.
did. He said the Second Amendment is under siege,
Okay.
which I don't even know how that's true.
Right.
It's like it's like the war on coal. By
Right,
the way.
and I goes and so I don't think that that they're actually, like I said, they're actually attacking her. They don't really believe in policy that actually matters, and that's the Never Trump movement. But there are some other really concerning things that people should take into account. That Donald Trump really has no concept of the American government and actual civics. And point in
You
case.
mean when he keeps saying you've had 30 years, 30 years?
Well,
30
that's-
years.
That's
that
an interesting
too.
point that he made too. Is he talked about her time as a senator, and she's like,
I've only been a senator for 8 years.
Well, but I was a senator with a Republican president.
And you're
Right.
one senator out of 100.
Right. Yeah.
There's a House of 400.
Do you think he knew that she was 1 out of 100? By the way,
I
No,
don't
he was
know.
it's only
But-
because she was in his state that he really kind of paid
That's
attention.
true.
I mean, it just shows that he thinks that any one person gets into government and then they're able to put into effect anything that they want. And
Well,
that
I think
if they have,
I think he fully expects to be able to do that, to sit down on day one and
Right.
kick all the Muslims out.
But
and
that's
build a wall.
But that's been the policy, and not only in that answer on the way that he wants to round up Mexicans on day one, kick Muslims out, but he also talked very dangerously about using the executive branch to go after political opponents, which is something that Vladimir Putin does in Russia, and which is why he likes Vladimir Putin so much.
But he doesn't know him. He says he doesn't know him.
And he doesn't know anything about Russian policy.
Yeah.
But somehow he can praise Russia. Somehow he can praise Russia in one breath, and then not know about Russia in the next breath. And to the point that Ari Fleischer, who used to be President Bush's press secretary, tweeted out, "Winning candidates don't threaten to put opponents in jail. Presidents don't threaten prosecution of individuals. Trump wrong on this." Using the Justice Department to go after a political opponent, again, is a dictator move. And Hillary Clinton should have said in that moment, "You are acting like Vladimir Putin. This is something that countries like Bashar Assad uses in his country, folks in Russia, and dictators around the world." So I think that could have been an opportunity
Yeah,
to
I want to get
remind
some
people that
comments
it's
from the
very
chat room in
dictatorial.
before they scroll up. N. Saeed 5674, who has been in the chat room before. Thanks for being here tonight. I am Muslim, and my friends who are Republicans, the minute he started to talk about registering Muslims and won the primary, said they're voting for Hillary. That's sort of what I was kind of expecting, the idea of the undecided Muslim. Our friend Jeff Graham joining in, but shout out to us. He did help us catch something in the last the VP debate. Keith Torello points out a quote from Barack Obama in 2008, "She will say anything and do nothing." We heard Donald Trump kind of echo that sentiment. Obviously, President Obama was running against her during, also another tightly contested primary campaign, much like Bernie Sanders did. You say a lot of things, but ultimately, when Obama was the nominee, I mean, for goodness sakes, Hillary Clinton was his Secretary of State. So
Right.
clearly they've, mended any fences.
But it goes back to something I read an article today in BuzzFeed News, which I think it's BuzzFeed is starting to try to test their journalistic. Put their toe in the water and
They're sowing their journalistic oats.
Right.
Yeah.
And the WikiLeaks dump came out this week, and obviously it didn't say much that people didn't already know. There was the Podesta emails that were kind of brought up in this. Well, stuff that people
from a Bernie person who was asking for these transcripts for a year.
But even reading those, there was nothing in it that was like, oh my God, it's so shocking. I
It
think
just confirmed what we knew. I think it would have made a much bigger difference if they had been dropped in the primary.
Right, but here's the right.
But at this point, it's too late.
Well, I'll let you finish your point, but I'll ask you about that in a second,
somebody asked
Chelsea.
me this weekend what I thought about it, and I was like, there's nothing in those transcripts that I think when you're being paid money, yes, you want to lift spirits up, and you want to tell them, which is she did, that we want to work with you in terms of figuring out policies that actually work. And I think that at the end of the day, you're not going to bring somebody into a room that has no clue how not to do X, Y, and Z. And I think you got to have people both in the room. You got to have the Bernie Sanders side on one side of the table, and you got to have the Wall Street people on the other side of the table, because she talks a lot about working across the aisle to try to figure out how things are going to work.
I'm cringing. I'm squirming.
Right,
We'll get to you in a second,
and Chelsea
don't
and Chelsea and I completely disagree on that, because at the end of the day, I'm like, listen, we want to get money out of politics. Yes, everybody's on the same page as that. But you. we're on the same page with that. I think Secretary Clinton brought it up today in today's debate. You wrote it down. I watched you do it, and she talked about that.
She mentioned it. She mentioned Citizens United, which is an important but small component.
She mentioned Citizens United, and she talked about Supreme Court justices not being on the side of corporate interest
all the time. Yes.
Right, but at the same time, I think the other part of that is that people forget that opposition research is a part of campaigns. What you have on another candidate is the job of a campaign chairman, is the job of a good campaign manager. And I think that anything that came out that was in those emails that were about Bernie Sanders is the job of the campaign chairman. Same thing with Barack Obama. I think that Barack Obama knew exactly what to say about what he thought to say about Hillary Clinton, and then at the end of the day, you do the jab, you get in, you get out, and you win the election. I think that's what happened.
Chelsea, I'll give you plenty of time to talk about that, but a couple things in the chat room. Susan Erickson says, Ivanka Trump went on vacation with Putin's girlfriend just a couple of weeks ago. Doesn't seem to know him. Right, these are for Kay Crutchfeld. 31. Drexel is spot on tonight and completely right that Hillary should have pointed that out about the prosecution. Shout out to Drexel. Brenda agreed with Drexel too. He is spot on. All right, so a little Drexel praise. Now, Chelsea, you feel like if these had come to light during the course of the primaries, that could have helped Bernie. What specifically did you see in this WikiLeaks dump that you think would have been helpful, that you were hoping to see earlier in this election cycle?
That the regulation of Wall Street was best left to the industry itself.
That's not what she said, but okay.
That's
not
but
what
that's
she
what
said.
you took from what?
That's not what she said.
I'm condensing it down into 4 seconds so that I can poignantly answer a question and not have a lot of fluff and yada yada. I'm just wanting to get straight down to the point. That's essentially the point that was made, and the whole idea that this is just some research that she did to try and understand the other side. I didn't say that either. She didn't say that, and I didn't say that.
Then
this is a problem when instead of sticking to one thing, we end up just sort of adding on layers, and then I don't understand what we're really talking about in a moment. But that was one of the big things that struck me, is that she wants or believes that Wall Street is a great regulator of itself, when I totally agree with Bernie that Wall Street doesn't regulate itself. Wall Street regulates Congress, and that is a massive problem that neither of these candidates have addressed. Even if we reverse Citizens United, which I think is very, very important, there's still a whole lot of other corruption that's gone on, that's allowed, that is the very reason why I went to D.C. and got arrested, was to bring attention to 5 bills that are already up there that could be voted on tomorrow. I mean, they're not going to be voted on tomorrow because who are we kidding? But there's a lot more to it than just Citizens United, although I do appreciate that at least she mentioned it so that people who don't even know about it can say, what's Citizens United, and hopefully Google it.
And hopefully it's on HillaryClinton.com. I don't know if it is, but they should look into what it is. Scrolled down, I missed it. I should have written it down. But
I just wanted to point
ahead.
out the fact that the quote that came out in terms of WikiLeaks, in terms of the transcripts, was, I believe no one knows the industry as good as you. That does not mean that they are going to be the ones regulating themselves. That means that, hey, you know your industry, let me bring you to the table, we're going to have that conversation, and then that's what we're going to do.
I think for a lot of people, after the housing crisis, the way that was handled and the...
Really? They're the ones that know the most?
I'm just saying, like,
it's just
after that
ridiculous.
happened, people are just like, look what happened to the people in charge of those big banks. All the people who lost their money.
We now know that they knew in advance
Right.
what was about to go down, and then they stood up there, testified, we had no idea.
There was a very boring movie nominated for an Oscar about it that people told me was great. Yeah, no, I get it. People knew, and some people made a lot of money.
Boring movie.
The Big Short.
It was not boring.
I like that Selena Gomez was in it. I like that Margot Robbie was in it.
You've got to be kidding me. We did a great show on Popcorn Talk, actually, about that.
I would have enjoyed
movie.
a documentary about it instead of a dramatization. That's actually what it came down to.
Well, there are many of them. I can point them out to you.
Please point them out.
I mean, I would sure like you to see pay to play. That would be a good place to start.
When you were talking before about Wall Street, I felt like this is when Stephen would have mentioned Clinton Cash. He definitely would have mentioned Clinton Cash, so I feel like it's my job, because he's not here. We have a lot of empty seats. I just wanted to make sure it was mentioned at some point. And then I do keep hitting the table. It was pointed out to me earlier. Anyway, there's so many things that were talked about during the course of the debate. There were occasionally some issues.
There were some good ones that
there
were
some
brought
good ones.
up.
They talked about health care. He talked about Donald Trump talked about how Obamacare is a disaster, and that the numbers are going up like we've never seen anywhere around the world. It'll explode in 2017. That sounds like a lot of rhetoric.
What I didn't understand is why Donald Trump said she wants a single payer system. She didn't mention anything about it, although she does. And I think there's a difference between a Canadian single payer system and a single payer option.
Well, one point that I did want to bring up that he mentioned about Canada, and I've read articles about this, not in recent years, but the way that their healthcare system is, there are certain procedures that Canadians will indeed come across the border into the United States, because the wait is like 2 years, and if you wait around Canada, you will probably die if you get it, if you wait for it. So they come to America. So there are definitely problems with the Canadian healthcare system, which obviously, there are like 40 people that live in Canada, and we have a few more. I'm joking, Canadian friends. However, there are a lot less people. It's a big landmass, but there aren't as many people. It's a little bit easier to manage the healthcare when you have that many people. And I don't know that he mentioned it articulately, but it is a point to make about, like you're saying, where they both stand on it. I'd like to know what he wants to do. We're going to fix it and get rid of it. I don't know that that's on DonaldJTrump.com. If Stephen was here, I'd ask him. He'd probably say it's not. But if you are going to get rid of it and replace it, what are just a couple, don't map the whole thing out, but give us a couple of points for how you're going to change it.
But I don't think that Donald Trump could know how to repeal and replace it, because Republicans over the past 7 years have not been able to come up with a policy to repeal their replacement option to do that. So, the only thing that we know out of repealing Obamacare is that 20 million plus people would be uninsured again, and that it would cost the American government over $130 billion to do that. So I think that at the end of the day, Secretary Clinton and Democrats are right in the direction that they want to help build on a system that everybody believes
President
in.
Obama himself has said there are problems with it and has wanted to sign legislation that would correct some of the holes, but the Republican Congress just sort of stonewalls so that they can make Obama appear to be a bigger failure than he actually is, or would be if they just got some work done.
Referring back to the undecided Muslim woman who asked the question, there were some notes that I took. Donald Trump said Islamophobia is a shame. We should make sure, this part's not a direct quote, make sure that Muslims report when they see problems. He said that that was the case in San Bernardino. Factcheck.org pointed out that he was wrong about that, about people seeing the bombs and just not reporting them. His point is certainly a valid one. We've talked about the phrase radical Islamic terror on this show. I think that his approach to handling Muslims, whether they're here already, whether they're coming in or whatever, any people coming in, is probably not the best approach. He has a point about, if you see something, say something.
Yeah, but you can't make people mandatory reporters.
Right. But, you can encourage them, and you would hope they would do it. But, yes, you can't pass legislation that, you better, rat out your people for the government.
I mean, the question was, how will you help people like me who have been perceived as a threat to the country? He didn't speak to that at all.
Right. And I don't think that so first of all, not only did he talk about Islamophobia being a shame, he also talked about Muslims in the country being a Trojan horse. And he talked about bombings in San Bernardino, and we all know that San Bernardino didn't have any bombs going off as far as I remember. There weren't any bombs going off. So I don't think he actually knows what goes on around the country, just as much as he doesn't know what goes on around the world.
Do you think he's ever been to San Bernardino?
I don't think he's ever set foot in San Bernardino, like he hasn't set foot in Oakland or any place that black people live, because I think he all thinks that black people live in inner cities around the country. But to your point on radical Islamic terrorism, I think that the new phrase that Hillary Clinton tested out tonight was violent jihadist terrorists, which I think that is going to be the new Democrat phrase if they choose to latch on to something like that.
It's better because they don't want to use the word
Right.
Islamic in what the
I mean,
name
if
of the
they're
enemy.
talking about the issue, I don't really care if they call it puppies and kittens. If they're actually
it's
talking about
actually
taking a
important,
stand
though.
against it, is it? No, I understand
Words
why
are
that
important.
words are important. But as Donald Trump said, she'll talk and talk, but she'll never do anything. I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
Because she's not a
I would
dictator.
like
She can
things to
never-
be done, sort of on a similar issue. It was a pretty terrible thing that seemed to have fallen by the
Oh,
wayside.
wait, and we forgot to mention that Donald Trump's rebuttal to this question ended up coming
about drugs are pouring into our country and ICE has
He did
endorsed
mention
me.
that, yeah.
And
the point
Secretary Clinton didn't correct. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there were moments that Secretary Clinton could have really said, "Well, Donald, I'm sorry, ICE can't really endorse people," and I think that's another lesson in civics.
But and it's also 90 minutes. What are you
Right.
going to get out of refuting that? But there was something he said that I wanted to make sure that we got in here before we ran out of time. Was that it doesn't even matter the context really. He said that Captain Kahn, I hope he was a captain.
Yeah.
Captain Kahn was an American hero. That part's great to say. If I'd been president, he'd be alive. And get your children away. But I saw something online from Jesse Larick, who is a foreign policy spokesman for Hillary Rodham Clinton. And he took that quote and he responded in a tweet, "Go fuck yourself." So I think that I don't know why he feels like he needs to say things like that, because I guess it just sort of reinforces I'm going to be the greatest president ever. It's going to be huge. I'm going to make sure I do everything. I'm going to grab you right in the pussy, America, and I'm going to take charge of you. And I mean, I think he thinks he's helping, he's keeping everybody safe. But to say that, it's just such a terrible thing. Like, look, there are definitely presidents that I think we can all say that we disagree with their policies. I can't imagine what it's like to make those decisions. That I think the best thing to do is to send our men and women in uniform off to fight this particular conflict. And then when you have to either write or call or however you communicate with a parent that, yes, my decision meant that your child is no longer with us, I can't imagine how hard that is. And for Donald Trump to just say, yeah, I'm not going to have to do it because I'm going to be so good at it, that's not even a major issue, but it so fundamentally, to me, represents just the way he looks at the world, right. And that he is going to be the greatest. And
well, he also thinks taxes are the highest in this country, when in actuality they're just not. But I think
do British celebrities still move here so that they don't have to pay like 90% in taxes?
Piers Morgan spends a lot of time defending Donald Trump on Twitter, so I'm sure that in Donald Trump's America, Piers Morgan would spend his time move back here. But I also think that Donald Trump would spend more time not deploying our troops around the world, but actually our troops to take out his political opponents around the country. So I think he would nationalize federalize the National Guard and then have them go after political opponents around the country. So, but that's Trump's America because that's what he believes.
Kimberly Kurzakowski, my apologies, Kimberly, one of our most ardent fans, says Trump says the things that he does because he is an entitled prick who believes he can say or do anything he wants and receive no consequences. I think that that's probably in the description of being a million or possibly billionaire. I think a lot of politicians feel that way too, but it's a great point.
I also want to bring up before we close tonight, and everybody
we're
starts
done already?
and
We're
everybody
getting very close,
and everybody
yes.
starts to see this next round of polling and that comes out, and people are going to be talking.
This
about
is going to
who
be
won the debate.
fascinating.
I think that at the end of the day, that people have to remember that online polls mean very little.
Very little.
They don't mean anything. They're not scientific polls. Nobody actually goes on there. I could pull up a Twitter poll, and people would, and Donald Trump and his camp would make it a legitimate poll, and so it's easy for multiple people to click multiple times on these polls. So I don't want people to take away the next few days thinking that Donald Trump somehow won this
Right.
debate
I
at all.
saw an article that there had been an internal memo at Fox News reminding everyone
Well,
that.
reminding Sean Hannity, basically.
Well, yeah, but
Call Sean Hannity.
But because of Call Sean Hannity, everybody else at the network needs to be reminded. You know, online polls are actually, not what we're using. Excuse me, not what we're basing any sort of, not even predictions, but it's not what we're using as a reference for how the polls are going. And whatever the polls say a week from now, I'm going to be fascinated because if there's not that much movement, that'll be, let's just say, a little surprising. And speaking of next time, we will be back next Wednesday. It's a long time from now. So much is going to happen. Is Mike Pence going to even be on the ticket anymore? I don't know. But we will be back next Wednesday, October 19th.
My mom's birthday.
Happy birthday, Mama Heard. After the third and final presidential debate, Stephen Helmkamp will not be here. He will be staying at the Trump Tower.
Trying to find his policies in Trump Tower in the big old building.
In Las Vegas. So we will be back at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern, Wednesday the 19th, after which we're going to go back to our regular time slot of Tuesdays. But you know what? That's only 3 shows. That third show is going to be election night. So it's here, basically. So before you know it, thanks to everybody in the chat room. And for those of you listening after the fact, please follow us on Twitter at TrumpHillary16. Send us your thoughts. Comment on the YouTube post to the archive, and we'll be happy to read them on a future show. For the absent Scott Moore, the absent Stephen Helmkamp, Chelsea Galicia at Chelsea Galicia, Drexel Heard at Drexel Heard. I'm Christian Bladt at Christian DMZ, and we will see you next Wednesday, October 19th at 8 Pacific. See you all then. Thanks.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.